Richard, thank you so much for coming to TvAbraham. You were serving, I believe, in Colombia in the late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at the late 90s and I see a region of Latin America where every country has a democratically elected government, except, of course, Cuba. But everywhere, looks like democracy is won. But then here we are 25 years later. So let me start out. What happened in Latin America?
Well, first, let me just take a second to thank you for inviting me and to wish all the best to TvAbraham as it gets underway.
Thank you.
It's certainly true that the late 90s, the beginning of the 21st century, was a period of optimism in Latin America and in terms of our relationship with the region. So yes, that was a very different time. Now the atmosphere is quite different. I don't think we should paint it entirely in a negative way, but it's become a more complicated region. Mexico has become drifting, I would say, towards a return to kind of a hegemonic one-party state in the sense that the judiciary and independent administrative bodies are much more under the control of the current regime of the Morena party. Central America, Nicaragua, of course, is really turned into a miniature North Korea at this point, a truly totalitarian state. El Salvador, is kind of the right-wing version of that, and a government that's the solution to truly serious crime problems is just to lock tens of thousands of people in jail without due process. Colombia, I think, it remains largely stable, but it's got problems. The government of Petro is not the most solid, I would say, in some ways, in terms of commitment to democracy, although the Colombians themselves are very strong on that. So it has become more difficult. And you have Venezuela, of course, which is, for decades was kind of the great, exception, a wealthy, prosperous, democratic country with center-left and center-right parties. And ever since Chavez came to power and then his successor, Maduro, democracy has been completely hollowed out there. That said, there are bright spots as well. Brazil, one had what seems pretty clear an effort to undermine the elected result and almost, people even talk about staging a coup, and that was just rejected by the Brazilian people completely. Argentina is trying to undergo a very significant reform effort under difficult circumstances, but this is all being done in a democratic context. Chile has gone back and forth. It had a very significant what they call the social explosion some years ago of countrywide protests, but they too have remained in the democratic column. So it's a difficult situation in a lot of countries, but others seem to be weathering the storm better.
Another thing that's changed a lot in the last 25 years is we're now competing with another country for influence in the region in a way we weren't maybe 25 years ago, China. Right. Turning to Panama, what do you make of that issue of their control of the ports?
China has no role in operating the canal. There are no Chinese troops in Panama, as has sometimes been asserted. What I do see is when the U.S. starts talking about retaking control, and that's the word that is used of the canal, that does not strike me as a terribly realistic option. Back in the days when we had the canal zone and it was a U.S. enclave, there were protests, and it was one of the reasons we began to think about it was time to turn over the Panama Canal, that this was just a piece of 19th century style imperialism that just wasn't feasible. And so you need to be very careful in maintaining good relations with the Panamanian people. There are, I'm sure, solutions to issues that may be out there, but I don't believe there's room for a military solution at all.
What's the solution for U.S. policy to Venezuela?
This is a very difficult problem. I would say the Venezuelan people are pretty clear on what they want.
Right.
They want democracy. It's a country with a democratic heritage. any hope of a solution requires, first of all, consistent protest and insistence on their rights on the part of the Venezuelan people under very difficult circumstances. For the United States, there are dilemmas here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, under President Trump, we had a maximum pressure campaign,
Right.
and that did not take us very far. Under President Biden, we had a genuine effort to reach out and see if we could create conditions that would allow for democratic transition,
Mm-hmm.
and they did. And this resulted in the the electoral process going forward, but not in its results being accepted.
Mm-hmm.
And related to that are two other issues. One
Mm-hmm.
is petroleum.
Right.
Venezuela is was in the past a huge producer of petroleum. Now it's not what it once was as a result of the sort of destruction of the sector by the Chavez and Maduro governments,
Mm-hmm.
but it still produces. And American companies have been involved there,
Mm-hmm.
and as part of the effort to find an opening, licenses had been permitted for a certain amount of petroleum
Right.
activity by U.S. firms, and the question is, should we renew these licenses or not? Complicating all this is the Trump administration's top priority in the region. It seems to be immigration and deporting illegal immigrants back to their home countries.
Mm-hmm.
And the Venezuelan government seems receptive to that. They have accepted some, but there's no such thing as a free lunch in international affairs. And I suspect they're doing this on the certainly the hope or the assumption that that to keep the flow of immigrants coming, the flow of petroleum will have to come too. So some tough decisions will be ahead of the U.S. government in the next months.
I see Argentina, and you've written a lot about it, including in the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune. The economy there seems to be responding well to the shock therapy of dramatic cuts. Is this is what happens in Argentina? Is it sort of like Las Vegas stays in Argentina, or will this have regional repercussions, do you think?
Well, first of all, what's being attempted in Argentina is fascinating to look at.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very heavy lift.
Yeah.
Argentina is a unique example of reverse development. It was a country that, in the first part of the 20th century,
Right.
was really on the cusp of having an economy like the United States, Canada, Britain,
Right.
and the last decade or 2 decades of a particularly leftist version of Peronism.
Yeah.
And it was free spending, seeking support largely from the unions and street level organizations, inflation, price controls, exchange controls. So
Yeah.
unpacking all that is a huge job. It's a matter of institution building as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Rule of law and independent courts, an education system that really supports long-term growth and reaches out to lower income citizens. Similarly, a health system, and doing all these at the same time is really tough. But often, what one sees is reform programs that work for a while, and then because the institutional base isn't there, then populist or even Marxist governments come back, and you have a cycle, and breaking that cycle is the great challenge for Latin America.
Right, and Javier Milei seems to be he's at least
he is
started
trying.
it.
He is trying. A year is not a long time in the life of a country.
No,
we have to remember that.
Yeah.
He benefits from the fact that the other way has been tried and failed so comprehensively.
Right.
And the people that oppose him will do everything except actually present an alternative program, because there really isn't one.
Yeah. Any country that you're particularly optimistic on in Latin America, if you look over?
First of all, as I said at the beginning, there's just no point in being globally pessimistic about about Latin America.
Right.
And each country does have its own set of pluses and minuses. There's an interesting small country, Uruguay, that I served in many years ago, next door to Argentina, culturally extremely similar agricultural-based economy, similar population base, et cetera, much smaller, kind of like the U.S. and Canada. Where Argentina has gone off to these far extremes of leftism, now followed by this like huge course correction, Uruguay has managed to kind of stay the course. Things aren't all that simple for them, but nonetheless, for instance, they did a big pension reform, and certain figures on the left and the unions were opposed to it, as often the case. And they held a referendum, and the reform passed. And it's because they move slow, but they work hard to build consensus. And that is just so crucial when you're doing these kinds of efforts to right the economy. That's where one worries a bit about Milei. He's a lot of hot rhetoric on all sides in Argentina. So we'll just have to see.
Richard, thank you so much. It's been a delight, and look forward to coming back again and giving us an update on Latin America.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.